Hello everyone, my name is Himanshu Sharma. In this video, we will configure GraphQL server and its client using DGS framework. To begin with, let's get an overview of DGS. DGS stands for Domain Graph Service. It helps us in implementing GraphQL on Spring Boot projects. It's a project started at Netflix and later on they open source it for the community. Let's start and navigate to Spring Initializer for our projects. Over here, we will need two projects, one for our server and for which the only dependency we need from here is Spring Web. It will be Gradle, Java, Spring Boot version 2.6.3, packaging jar, Java version 17, and we generate. And the another project we need is client, and with the exact same configuration, we'll generate. Here you will have your two projects, and you can extract them and import it in your favorite IDE. I'm using IntelliJ. I have projects imported. Let's start with server. In build.gradle, we need to add DGS dependencies. These are the two dependencies you need. We need domain objects for our communication. For the domain, I have created a person class having fields person ID, person name, and person address. And then person address again contains some fields, street name, house number, city, and country. Now we are going to create a dummy data store which will provide us list of person. And for that, let's create a package. And a class person store. To speed things up, I have some code snippets available. Okay, so we created a dummy store which will provide us a list of person objects with this method getPersonList. Now based on our domain objects, let's create GraphQL schema file, and for that you'll navigate to resources, you create a directory schema. So DGS by default look for this location for your schema file, and we'll create a file. And here we will first define our domain objects. Type person, person had person ID, which was int, person name, which was string, person address, which is our custom type, person address, and for this, again, street name, string, house number, string, city, country. So we define our domain objects over here. And now let's create our queries which we need. So for that, type query. We'll be creating two queries. First is all persons, and this will return an array of person. In our case, that will be the list which we are getting from the dummy data store. And search person, which will take search person ID as argument integer and return a person. Now corresponding to our two queries, we will create data fetcher, and for that let's create a directory, data fetchers class person data fetcher. This will be our DGS component, and corresponding to two queries, we will have two methods, list of person, all persons, and it will return the person list. So this method will return the person list and corresponding to our person query, and this is also annotated with one of the DGS annotation representing that it's a DGS query. And for the second one, we will have person search person. This one is also a DGS query, but this one is expecting an argument. Put argument search person ID. And here we will return person store dot get person list dot get string. Okay, so search person will take search person ID as an argument, and based on that ID, it will filter the list and provide the response. So you can see over here, search person and all persons are the two queries we defined over here. So the DJ's responsibility is to connect these queries with your implementation in the data fetcher. Let's run our server application. Our application is started on port 8080. Let's go to browser, and over here you need to type GraphQL. So this is the URL you will get when you are using DGS, and you can use this URL to test your server. So I have this query ready already. So let's start. We'll hit the server and we're getting the response for the search person. Let's try out with the all persons. All persons don't need any require argument. So we are getting the response over here. On the right hand side, you can see the root types. You can click on the query and get the two queries you have written in the GraphQL schema. Okay, now let's write a unit test for our server. For that, let's go to the test folder, create a class person data fetcher test. Okay, we need only two classes in our context, and that is DGS auto configuration and person data fetcher. Okay, we will be using DGS query executor. And we will test for search person query. DGS query executor execute. So here you need to pass the query, and what the query is, the query is the one which we are providing over here. So search person, and it was search person ID using ID 2. So just copy all this and we paste it inside here. So we are going to execute that same query, and now we need to save it, the result of our query. So execution result is over here. So now let's create JSON object using our GJSON, this one, and we say create a JSON object using the execution result get data dot toString, and from this JSON object we again perform for search person. And why I need to do this is, so if you see the response, let's get back to our browser. If you see the response of this query, so the response is like you have a parent data and then you have a parent as search person of your inner object. So when I'm saying get data and then I'm saying get search person, so now I'm getting this as my target object. So now I can say assert equals JSON object dot get, and here I just need person ID and it should be 2 because we are sending person ID 2. Just put over here. Yeah, this should be fine. And let's copy it again, and we need it for name, and the name should be person name 2. So we are getting exception, so let's put it in a try catch block. Okay, so let's test it out. Let's put a debug point over here and one over here just to make sure that nothing is getting break. And now let's run our test. So we got the debugger correct. Let's copy it and analyze this object, and you can see over here it contains all our information, person name 2, the address and everything, because that's all we requested in our query. Let's continue, and that's it. So our test case is correct and our server is working fine. So now let's move on to GraphQL client. I have closed all the open files and now I am in build.gradle file of GraphQL client. Over here we need to add one dependency, the GraphQL client, and let's load the Gradle changes. Gradle loaded the changes, so let's create a controller. New package controller. Let's say test controller. This will be our REST controller, and we will create test client which will return a string, and we say, let's say string return result no data found, return result. this will be a get mapping. Let's provide a path. Okay, here we are going to create a request executor because we need that to create our custom GraphQL client. So request executor, you will get it from the DGS client library, and it will be a lambda expression. I have the code snippet ready. So to speed things up, let me paste it for you. Let's resolve our errors. Plate header spring framework HTTP response entity again HTTP method and be entity and response will be this one. Now using this executor, let's create our client. So we say GraphQL client client equal to GraphQL client dot create custom, and here you're going to provide the URL, which will be localhost 8080 GraphQL and our request executor. That's it. So here you need to make sure that you're using GraphQL and not GraphIQL, because GraphIQL is a UI which allows you to test your server, but your GraphQL queries are actually hitting using this endpoint. So basically your GraphIQL UI, which was this one, is internally using this IP and this endpoint for processing. Now let's get the response. So for this, we'll get GraphQL response, and we get it when we perform execute query. And here again, we can directly use our query. Just copy this query and paste it. Okay, so that's all we need. So here we are getting the information in the response, and to present it, we will use object mapper and JSON node. So for that, we put the operation inside a try catch. JSON node, which will be node, and we use object mapper dot read tree, and we say response. So in your response, you will get a JSON property which you can access get JSON, and here you will get the response as a JSON string. So get JSON will actually give you this whole. So just focus on the structure, data, search person, and then we have the information. So to our ID, and here in the return result, we will update it with node dot get data, and then again search person, and then true string. That's it. So we are hitting the GraphQL API, getting the response, and then putting that response in a JSON node, and then iterating the node to get our information. Before starting our client application, let's update one property. Since we are aware that server is already running on port 8080, so let's change the port of our client application as 8181. Let's run it. Our application is started. Let's go to terminal and hit this endpoint. 8181. And here we have the information we requested in our query. We requested for person ID 2, we are getting it for 2. That's all in this video. Thank you everyone. Thanks for watching. And if you have any comments or suggestions, just let me know in the comment section. Thank you.